achieved.
So I would say it lived up to the hype. The Holloway-Ortega featherweight championship bout at UFC 231 was a fantastic fight. It was, for the most part, dominated or at least won by Max Holloway. Ortega certainly had his moments, and he absolutely showed his heart and willingness to compete. And you know, he went down at the end of the fourth round. He absorbed more strikes than anyone in the history of the UFC. I believe the total was somewhere in the 300s is what Max landed on him, and it would have got worse. And the fact that he came out afterwards and agreed with the judges, you know, he had a broken thumb and some other injury as well. You know, it's a class act all the way around. It was a good fight. You got that tension, and I look forward to it happening again. I anticipate when those two guys fight again at some point, it will most likely be at lightweight as they get a little bit older, probably, you know, pushing beyond 30. I expect to see them fight again sometime. But you know, it was a very definitive win for Max Holloway, and I picked Brian Ortega. I was wrong, 100%. And I love Max Holloway. He's one of my favorite fighters of all time. But there were a couple things that stood out to me, and the health issues were concerned. The layoff was a concern, and you know, Ortega, the things he had going for him, Max just went out there, proved me wrong, proved his doubters wrong, you know, reinforced why his fans love him, and it was just a fantastic performance all around. And I honestly think he's the best featherweight of all time. I know there's arguments can be made for Jose Aldo. There's arguments that can be made, you know, some people will suggest that Conor McGregor, having beaten both those guys, but Conor McGregor beat a Max Holloway in a different stage in his career. He was the last man to beat Max, and then Max went on this run. Max is certainly a different fighter now. Would I love to see Conor McGregor versus Max Holloway? Absolutely. It would most likely have to be at lightweight. I think if I'm Max Holloway, the next guy I want to take on is Frankie Edgar. If he takes out Frankie Edgar at featherweight, he will pretty much have done what he needed to accomplish that division, and then he could consider moving on. But again, very interesting going forward. And for Ortega, I want to see him do well. I thought he did a lot of good things well. He was just beaten by a superior, more well-rounded, more capable fighter on that night. Welcome back to Kamikaze Overdrive MMA Predictions. Always, I am your host, Scott Johnson. And on this episode of the show, we are breaking in the upcoming UFC on Fox 31, Lee versus Iaquinta 2, which will be the final event in the UFC Fox deal. We're moving on to ESPN from here. This fight goes down this weekend in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on December 15th, 2018. I'll be giving you all of my main card predictions on this episode of the show, and as always happens, all of my preliminary picks and breakdowns will be available at kamikazeoverdrive.net completely free. I always get one person, one, two, sometimes more per video posting where your prelim predictions. They're on my website written up. You don't have to pay for them. Literally go to the site. There's a link in the description below. Go to my website, click on the link, click on the prelim slider that pops up, and you can go check them out. They're all there. All my archive predictions are there as well. The only thing you pay for is my bet packs, and I'm coming off a pretty, it wasn't a great showing. It was a losing night. You know, I had Ortega as my top play. I did have Gilbert Burns, but you know, other than that, it didn't pan out the way I was hoping it would. You know, Gunnar Nelson taking Alex Oliveira after Oliveira had his moments in the first round. Bokniak underperformed. I had Thiago Santos by knockout, which was a nice win. But then losing split decisions with Eric Anderson and Caitlin Chukagian, arguably both of them could have won those fights. They were close. That really, really was a big-time setback for me. So, hey, it is what it is. So, again, sometimes we win, sometimes we learn. We'll look at it that way. And we'll go for the bet packs. Of course, $15 for full fight breakdowns, or you can subscribe to the final two fights of the year, and you'll save a few bucks if you do that. Now, after this, we get our Christmas coming up, so we get a bit of a break. We have one to round the pay-per-view to round out UFC's 2018 calendar, and then we move over to 2019 after a couple of weeks off, which I'm kind of looking forward to. Also, if you are looking for a new place to bet, melbet.org is a fantastic betting site. You can check out a link in the description below. They offer a number of different betting opportunities for you to look at, both with regards to mixed martial arts and every other sport imaginable. They had all kinds of sports on that website that certainly were options for you to bet on. So certainly consider melbet.org if you're looking for a place to bet. You can follow me on Twitter at KO_predictions. I try and tweet as much as I possibly can, but hey, I'm a busy dude. On that note, we've got 4 awesome main card predictions to check out, so let's get to that first main card fight. So the first fight on the main card is actually the first of 2 rematches we'll see on this main card, as Jim Miller, 29-12-0 with 1 no contest, takes on Charles do Bronx Oliveira with a current record of 24 wins, 8 losses, and 1 no contest. This fight will be going down in the lightweight division. Now, this is a rematch from all the way back in 2010. Ridiculous how far we're going back for this fight. It was at UFC 124, which featured Josh Koscheck taking a second shot at Georges St. Pierre, this time for the title. George ultimately winning, busting up his orbital bone. In that fight, Miller on the prelims defeated Oliveira by knee bar in just under 2 minutes. It was the 6th of 7 straight wins for Jimmy, which was fantastic and showed he was really at the height of his professional run in the UFC. Now, for Oliveira, it was also a landmark fight. It was the first loss of his career. He was 14-0 coming into it. Since that fight, he won 2 of the 7 fights that followed it, starting with that Miller loss, so he really started to struggle. He had a no contest mixed in there as well. He was also just 21 years old and just a purple belt at the point of competition there, so he's really improved since. Now, Oliveira, he's moved back to lightweight for this fight. He's 3-1 since coming back to lightweight, beating guys like Will Brooks, Clay Guida, and Christos Giagos, all by submission, which is darn impressive, with his only loss coming against Paul Felder, coming by TKO in a fight that he was very close to winning. For Miller, he is coming off a much-needed victory, stopping Alex White. It ended a 4-fight losing streak, and Miller throughout his career has been very streaky. He had a stretch where he was undefeated in 4, and then he went 1-4 over a stretch, then he went 3-0, and then he went 0-4 prior to the Alex White loss. So he's the type of guy he wins in bunches and he loses in bunches. So this could be the start of another little run if he can get the right matchmaking. Now, Oliveira has fought, as I mentioned previously, at featherweight. He actually has mentioned returning to featherweight at some point in time, but he's at lightweight for now. We'll see if that pans out. He is 2 inches taller than Jim Miller. He'll have a 3-inch reach advantage, and he is the younger fighter by 6 years. Now, when you look at that first fight, Oliveira outlanded Jim Miller by a whopping 5 strikes to 1. Again, they didn't spend a lot of time on the feet, and it wasn't a heated action when they were competing. Then Miller took him down and got the submission victory. Now, again, as I said, that was the main... The first fight, we saw GSP Koscheck in the main event. It was just a crazy fight to go back and watch because it was that old school UFC again. Not old school in the sense more modern old school. Goldie was doing the commentating. He saw some of the the promos and the build-ups. So it was kind of neat. I really enjoyed that. Going back to the action, though, Oliveira, he shot for a low single leg, had no luck with it. He was firing head kicks and leg kicks, which is choice of technique in that. Miller picked up a takedown, and Oliveira went right to his bread and butter, or at least one of his bread and butter moves, his guillotine, but Jim got out of guard very effectively. Charles transitioned, started attacking off his back. Oliveira actually started attacking Jim's leg, and Miller, being a very opportunistic submission fighter, he countered with his own leg attack, and Charles Oliveira underestimated or didn't respect Jim's submission skills, didn't realize the trouble he was in. Instead of trying to push off and separate, he just started to punch his way out of it, and then you just see, boom, it was just a snap submission. The pain got real quick, and Oliveira had to tap. And that was a big loss for him. For Miller, huge victory. Now, Oliveira, since that stretch overall, he's gone 10-8 with a 1 no contest. And he's fought some pretty elite competition, fighting Max Holloway, Frankie Edgar, Anthony Pettis, Donald Cerrone. Very good competition. For Miller, since that fight, he's gone 10-10 also with a no contest, and he's fought guys like Donald Cerrone, Dustin Poirier, Anthony Pettis as well, and Nate Diaz. So both guys have fought a lot since they last met. They fought a lot of competition. They've had very good careers. Now, I would say, comparing the two, Oliveira has improved more. He's improved his striking significantly. He manages distance very well. And the thing is, he can throw any technique he wants, any high-risk maneuver, anything he wants. He doesn't care because his jiu-jitsu is so effective. And it actually goes as far as to take away the offensive weapons of other opponents. But again, with Jim Miller putting off a submission victory over him, does that give Miller some added confidence and a willingness to go to the ground with Oliveira and say, hey, I've got you once, I can get you again, or at the very least, I can avoid you submitting me. Oliveira, again, he throws good combinations, as I said, slick kicks up and down the body. He's got some sneaky knees, which he'll work in. When he fought Clay Guida, he hurt Guida on the feet and forced him to shoot in which he got that submission victory, got the guillotine locked up. And he has a crushing guillotine, and he's incredibly nasty if he can take your back. He has long arms and limbs. He's just a wizard on your back. He can attack really from any position, and he has the most submission victories in the UFC at 11, just passing Royce Gracie with his last victory. Now, he does like to have time to strike. And if opponents can push forward and be aggressive, they can overwhelm him with pressure. But at the same time, if they're too chaotic and too irresponsible with what they're doing, it can create sub-opportunities for Oliveira out of the chaos. And he has an excellent level change, and his wrestling's drastically improved as well. Now, Miller, as I said, he's slumped a little bit, but he's been facing top competition, and that's impressive. He's been facing top guys, and he's been competitive with those guys. Overall, the guy's got 15 wins by submission. It's incredibly solid that he submitted Charles Oliveira. He's actually been submitted twice since that fight, but still, he's got a very solid resume when it comes to grappling. He's a good wrestler. He's got takedowns in each of his last 6 fights. so he shows he can take just about anybody down, but he's also given up at least 8 takedowns in his last 5 fights, or at least he had a 5-fight stretch, where he gave up 8 takedowns, not including his last 2 fights where that didn't happen. I have to wonder if Jim's going to be a little overconfident facing Oliveira on the ground because of that submission victory. You know, he's been known to give up position for submission and get a little too over-eager in the grappling department, and that could get him in some trouble here. You know, in his last fight, he looked good. I mean, Alex White, he's not exactly a world beater. He dropped Alex White with a straight left. His hands did look better. He set up a nice submission. We didn't really see a lot of one of his best techniques is that real low ankle kick where it can take away a fighter's base and could be very effective against Charles Oliveira because it takes away his base, takes away his movement, and minimizes the risk that Oliveira can catch it and set up a takedown. You know, we've seen Miller have some issues with distance weapons. When he fought Dan Hooker, Hooker was using a lot of kicks and keeping him on the outside, and it set up the knee strikes once Miller did push forward. You know, if Miller can push forward and put pressure on Oliveira, that is his best opportunity. And, you know, we saw Miller counter Hooker's pressure with wrestling. That's probably not going to be an option here against Charles Oliveira. If he wants to try and take Oliveira down, he's putting himself right into the teeth of the shark here, and that's a major concern. Miller has struggled to match the volume of his opponents in decisions. Oliveira is the more active fighter on the feet. He's the more diverse striker as well. Miller could absolutely hurt Oliveira and grab a submission or even knock him out. Oliveira has been known to take damage and shut down. We could even see him capitalize on a mistake for Oliveira, but I believe Charles has tightened up his submission game significantly. He's greatly improved. He is at a much better spot than Jim Miller. Charles could pick up a sub here. He could pick up a knockout, or he simply could outwork Jim for the decision. I don't think Miller has as many avenues to victory. I think Oliveira gets his revenge here, and my prediction is Charles Oliveira to defeat Jim Miller by submission. Up next, we move to the UFC's bantamweight division as the 11th ranked Rob Font, 15-4-0, takes on the number 2 ranked flyweight fighter Sergio Pettis with a record of 17 wins and 4 losses. Now, Pettis is fighting at home in Milwaukee. That's why he's getting the main card opportunity. This is a huge fight for him. As they said, he's moving back up to bantamweight because it will appear the flyweight division is on borrowed time. He's coming off a loss to Jose Formiga that pretty much put a stamp on his ability to contend for the title. He upset Joe Benavidez one fight earlier, which was a huge victory for Sergio, but he just could not capitalize on it. I love the Formiga fight. He was an underdog in that fight. It was a great matchup for him, and I was all over that one. Now for Rob Font, he's coming off a loss as well to Rafael Sunsao. He stopped Ricardo Almeida one fight earlier, so again, same situation, big win, couldn't follow it up with a fight. You know, when you look at his career in the UFC overall, he's 5-3, and the losses he's had against Sunsao, against Pedro Munoz, and against John Lineker, all very good competition. Physically, Font, the more natural bantamweight, 2 inches taller, 2-inch reach advantage. Pettis is the younger man by 6 years. Now, Pettis is a very sound striker. Not a lot of power, but technically sound. And he's improving. Font's a good striker as well, which is worth noting. He's shown much more finishing skills with 4 knockouts in the UFC. Overall, Font also has the edge in strikes landed per minute by just 1, but he also gets hit almost 1 time more per minute than Pettis does. So it's very close. And again, those fights, you have to take them with a grain of salt when you're looking at these things and say, okay, you know, hey, styles make fights, you know, so we don't want to play too much into that. Now, the first thing that stands out to me when you look at these two guys is Pettis' vulnerability to takedowns. He has given up 11 takedowns over his last 4 fights, and he's been taken down in 11 of his 12 UFC fights. So it's well known at this point that Pettis struggles when opponents can put him down. Font does have 4 wins by submission, including 1 in the UFC. He took Ricardo Almeida down in that fight. He took Douglas D'Andrade down twice before submitting him. He's picked up a couple single takedowns in a couple other fights. And when he fought Andrade, he had some nice level changes that, you know, taking advantage of his aggression and putting him down. And he appears to have built his attack around the ground game, which tells us Rob Font is looking at his opponents, looking where they're most vulnerable and capitalizing, and that's something I would expect to see him do here against Sergio Pettis. Now, it's certainly an avenue he could explore, and we'll see if that's the way it plays out. What Pettis wants to do, he absolutely needs to keep this fight on the feet. He's got a solid left jab. He's very quick with it. He does a good job of disrupting his opponent's offense. Minimal windup for all of his techniques. Everything he throws is very quick, and that which makes it that much more effective, and it's harder to brace for, it's harder to defend against, and it makes it more likely he could catch you with something and knock you out, especially if he can counter your forward pressure. When he fought Benavidez, he dropped him with a counter right hand, but again, not a ton of knockout power. It's more good placement and timing. It's also worth noting when you look at Pettis, over his last 10 fights, in 8 of them he's landed more strikes than his opponents, even in defeat. And one of those other 2 he tied. So he works fairly steadily, despite the fact he's not blowing the doors off guys with volume. He's still right there all the time. How does moving up to bantamweight help him? We've seen him at bantamweight before. I had him against Alex Caceres. He lost that fight. I had him to lose that fight, and he did. But he was still doing very well right up to getting finished. But not cutting weight should certainly benefit him. Fighting at home is also a big advantage for Sergio Pettis. One thing I don't think a lot of people recognize with Pettis, and I've picked up on it, Pettis has an issue with fading. He seems to take the last round off of a fight. It's not noticeable. It's not like he's panting and struggling. It's just his offense is not quite as frequent or as crisp, and he's just a less active fighter, and his opponent has a chance to get back in the fight. And in a close fight, that can cost him. It almost cost him against Benavidez after a super strong start. When you look at Font, he's the bigger man. He has the edge and power, and as well as activity rate, which is 2 big check marks to have in your favor. I expect to see him find some success with his wrestling if he opts to use it. I hope he does. And it's a great counter for him if Pettis starts winning the exchanges. Pettis has to find success with speed, but I think he's going to struggle to get in range against Font. Probably won't hurt Font with any of his offense. Overall, I just think Rob has more avenues for victory here, and my prediction is Rob Font to defeat Sergio Pettis by decision. We move now to the co-main event of the evening. We're in the UFC's lightweight division as the 5th-ranked Edson Jr. Barboza, 19-5-0, takes on New Zealand's 14th-ranked Dan the Hangman Hooker with a current record of 18 wins and 7 losses. Now, Barboza has lost back-to-back fights coming into this matchup, but he lost those guys to Kevin Lee and the current and reigning undefeated champion, Khabib Nurmagomedov. Very impressive opponents. If you're going to be defeated by guys, you might as well lose to the best. He had won 3 fights prior to those setbacks, defeating Anthony Pettis, Gilbert Melendez, and Beneil Dariush, all in very impressive and significant and definitive fashion. For Hooker, he comes into this fight having won 4 consecutive fights, all by stoppage. And he's taken out guys like Mark Diakese, Ross Pearson, Jim Miller, and Gilbert Burns, so a nice run, and finished all of them, which is very big to take out names like that. Prior to that, he had alternated wins and losses through his first 6 in the UFC, going 3-3. Physically, Hooker 1 inch taller than Edson, but they will have the same reach, which is normally not something Hooker's having to deal with. Dan is the younger man by 4 years, and it's worth noting that he started his UFC run where he went 3-3 at featherweight. Since moving up to lightweight, he's undefeated. Now, looking at their finishing stats, both guys very capable of putting opponents away. Hooker, 9 wins by submission overall. Sorry, my correction. 9 wins by knockout overall, 7 wins by submission. By comparison, Edson Barboza has finished 11 opponents by knockout, just a single submission, but both guys know how to finish. Now, the bigger stat that stands out to me here is Edson Barboza has gone to the scorecards 9 times, and he is 7-2 overall in decisions. For Hooker, he's gone the distance 6 times in his career, and he is just 1-5. And he has 0 wins in 3 UFC decisions, all at featherweight. We haven't seen him go the distance in lightweight yet. We haven't really seen him push beyond the opening couple of rounds in lightweight in a close competitive fight. But again, he has some issues there that are worth noting. Now, Hooker's not a big volume striker. In victory, the biggest total he's landed was 69 significant strikes in his knockout of Ross Pearson. Usually he's in that 20 to 30 strike range, but again, he doesn't need it because he more often than not puts his opponent away. In his 3 defeats, we've seen his opponents land 59, 52, and 132 significant strikes. He wasn't able to match any of those totals in either one of those fights. He gives up a lot when he can't get the stoppage. He landed somewhere in the 90s in that last fight, but again, his opponent was Maximo Blanco, landing over 130 strikes. That's a lot to give up. And one of the things with Hooker, and it might not be a big issue here, it could actually be a bigger issue, is that despite his reach and his height over most opponents, especially at featherweight, he collapses that reach. He does a lot of his good work on the inside, and it makes him less effective when it comes to shutting down his opponents with that reach, and it opens him up to taking more damage. Now, for Barboza, in his longer fights, he's usually in that 50 to 70 strike range. He's a more active striker overall when compared to Dan. Edson, he's got... looking at Hooker first. Hooker's offense, he throws very hard low kicks. He'll go high with them as well. I love his use of knees, especially when he can attract an opponent in. We saw that with Jim Miller. He throws a nice left jab. He doesn't put meaningful strikes together in combination too often. He throws a lot of significant single strikes, but again, it's his best offense. Again, it's one and done. One hard kick to the body, one hard low kick, one hard straight right, one hard jab. But it's nothing in punches and bunches. Now, when you look at what the key to beating Edson Barboza has been in the past, it's been pressure. Kevin Lee and Khabib did it with wrestling pressure. Michael Johnson and Tony Ferguson did it with striking pressure, coming forward with a constant flow of offense and not allowing Edson Barboza to set up his striking techniques. That's huge. We saw Hooker move forward versus Jim Miller more than he has in the past, but he wasn't constantly throwing, and in fact, he was moving forward and putting himself in range to take damage from Miller, and that was a fight he had reach. He had a reach advantage on Jimmy. So it's just, yeah, again, he can move forward, he can press forward, but he doesn't traditionally offer the type of offensive pressure that those other fighters that have had success against Edson in the past. It's also worth noting, in recent fights, Hooker has had a between 2 and 4 inch height advantage over his opponents, and then against opponents he usually has a reach advantage. A couple occasions has been 4. The closest anyone's had against him is 2. He had a 6-inch reach advantage over Ross Pearson, but again, just 1 inch taller than Barboza, same height. So that's going to be very interesting to see if that plays a role here. Now, Edson, he is an elite striker. Brutal leg kicks, he will work to the body, and he'll go to the head as well. Everything he throws sets up something else. I'll attack the legs. When they start, flinching and defending their legs, I'll go to the body and potentially open up looking at the head. He's a dynamic kicker. He's just dangerous as fuck. Now, the last 2 men to beat him, as I previously mentioned, had 4 takedowns each in those fights. 8 takedowns total. That was the key. When he fought guys that stood with him, like Anthony Pettis, like Gilbert Melendez, like Paul Felder, he beat him up on the feet and won those fights. Against Dariush, he wasn't nearly as active on the feet, and I think that had a lot to do with the threat of the takedown. And if he got the knockout, he got the win, but had Dariush been able to establish his takedown game, it could have changed things significantly. Barboza puts his strikes together in quick punching combinations. He will end with kicks. He throws a nice variety. Now, on the flip side, his chin's been an issue at times. He did survive and go the distance with Nurmagomedov, but he took a beating. He went deep with Kevin Lee and had his moments, nearly finished Kevin Lee at one point, but it was again his death by accumulation. Lee took him out. Those are some big, tough fights to come back from, and it could diminish him overall. Cerrone hurt him before submitting him as well back in the day, so he can take damage, and he can be hurt, and he can be finished. I was impressed with Edson. I had Ferguson in that fight. I was impressed with how he held his own with the Ferguson pressure. And in fact, I felt when he came out of that fight afterwards, he looked much better in following fights and subsequent matchups because of that situation. He learned how to deal with it. He learned how to implement it himself. In fact, Edson always comes back strong from defeats. This is the first time ever he's lost back-to-back fights, and again, he's fought elite competition in those fights. And he tends to come back and win matchups, and sometimes, again, multiple matchups after losses. He grows from his fights. Dan Hooker could go to his wrestling here, put Barboza on the mat, and try and capitalize on the issues he's had in the past. Barboza has only struggled with elite-level grapplers in the past. I never like to pick an opponent who needs to deviate from what he does well. Hooker's a good kicker. Barboza's a better kicker, harder kicks, quicker kicks, better technique. Dan could absolutely stop him on the feet, hurt him, catch him with something, or even knock him down and catch him with a submission. But again, I don't like banking on those scenarios where it's like he's got to do this one thing, because I think once Hooker gets beyond the first round and the damage starts to pile up, that's when Barboza can take over. I think Barboza's going to outwork him here. He'll slow him down with those low kicks, and my prediction is Edson Barboza to defeat Dan Hooker by decision. Moving now to the main event of the evening, we get our second main card rematch as the 4th-ranked Kevin the Motown Phenom Lee, 16-4-0, takes on the 8th-ranked raging Ally Iaquinta with their current record of 13 wins, 4 losses, and 1 draw. Now, this is a rematch from a couple years ago as well, going back to December 2015, UFC 169. Ally Iaquinta won it by unanimous decision. It was Kevin Lee's debut. It was the 4th fight in the promotion for Al, as he was building a bit of a winning streak since losing the Ultimate Fighter. Now, Al is coming off that short-notice interim title fight loss to Khabib. I put short in quotations. He basically was told, oh, by the way, you're fighting for the title tonight. Incredibly short notice, and he held his own. He went 5 rounds with the champion. It did snap his 5-fight winning streak. Well, I guess Nurmagomedov wasn't the champion at the time, champion after the fact. For Lee, he beat Edson Barboza, the aforementioned Edson Barboza, in his most recent appearance. After losing the interim title fight against Tony Ferguson, he avoided that post-title fight letdown scenario. Fantastic for him. He looked good in the Ferguson fight. He faded, though, and he had won 5 in a row prior to that defeat. Physically, same height, but Kevin Lee just has a ridiculous reach. He will have a 7-inch reach advantage over Al, and he's the younger man by 5 years. Now, this is the first time Al's fought twice in the same year since 2015, and he's had a lot of issues with inactivity. He had a 2-year gap between 2015 and 2017 bouts, and then he was off for another year before he fought again in 2018. And actually, his last 3 fights have all come in April. 2015, 2017, 2018. So inactivity has been a major issue with Iaquinta. Since their first meeting, Al lost his next fight. He got upset by Mitch Clark, got submitted, but went 5-2. Lee won his next 4, so he actually went the opposite direction. compared to Al, and he went 10-2 overall, so he's had to be much more active and very successful. When you look at that first fight, Al won the striking exchanges total 49-39. Lee did pick up the only successful takedown completion, and he had a couple of submission attempts. Now, they opened up by trading strikes at range. Lee did get dropped early with a left hand, but he recovered. And he was also the first man to shoot. Al attacked with the heel hook attempt. He countered with a heel hook, which cost him position, but it got him out of it fairly quickly. We did see Lee later on land a second nice takedown, and he was able in the second round to rotate to Al's back, sink in a rear naked choke, and Al's had some issues with submission defense, and it was very close to ending that fight right there. I picked Kevin Lee in the first fight, so I was wrong. It was a very competitive, fun fight. We did see going to the third round, Lee's leg was a little bit injured. He seemed to be having issues with it, and he certainly was diminished heading into the final round, which was a 1-1 fight at the time, so it could have gone either way. Lee got on top early in that final frame, but he couldn't hold it. Al, was unsuccessful in his takedown defense in that fight. Couldn't stay vertical as much as he needed to, but he was good at getting back up and scrambling back to his feet. Both guys were bloody and tired, but Al was certainly landing the better strikes. Lee was following him around the cage and eating shots, and that ultimately got Iaquinta the victory. So the first thing we have to question when we look at this fight is who has improved more. Lee certainly has fought more, but both guys have fought elite competition. Ferguson for Lee, Khabib for Al. Now, Iaquinta got absolutely manhandled in the opening rounds by Nurmagomedov with the takedowns, but he survived and forced a striking exchange and held his own, looked decent, especially when you consider how short, limited time he had to prep for that fight. He showed good head movement throughout that fight when Nurmagomedov was striking with him. And, he went the distance. When Lee fought Ferguson, he dropped Tony early in that matchup, but actually got stumbled himself when he tried to chase him down. He was having a lot of success taking Tony Ferguson down and staying on top. He actually mounted him near the end of the round and in the opening stages, and was dropping some bombs and had Ferguson in trouble, and the bell saved Tony. And some people would say if that happened earlier in the fight, we might have seen Kevin Lee walk away with the victory. Kevin has a very solid left jab. We saw him utilize that, and he follows it up with a nice right, straight right. He does his best work when he throws straight punches, which is something that's worth noting compared to the first time they fought. When he fought Ferguson again, he was still landing takedowns in the third round, but he clearly was tired, under attack from submissions, got caught, got finished. But again, still landing takedowns, which has been one of his areas of strength, strongest areas. Before Nurmagomedov, Lee was the last man to take Al Iaquinta down, but Al has not faced a dedicated wrestler since that fight. A guy who's going to come out and say, I'm going to put 10 takedown attempts on you and see what I can come up with. He hasn't faced anybody like that, so very interesting to see how this plays out. There are some issues and concerns with Kevin Lee missing weight. And has struggling to make hard weight cuts. How does he hold for 5 rounds? He did have a staph infection in his last fight, or his fight against Tony. That certainly is concerning. When you look at how these two guys shake out, Lee has been more active in recent fights, and I really question Al's commitment to the sport. He's been very vocal about how disillusioned he is with the sport and working, looking at his real estate business, and you wonder at what point does that really start to impact his performance. I would say overall, Lee's takedown offense, his wrestling, and his ground control have improved significantly. And that's huge. Where Al hasn't shown a lot of offensive wrestling, and he's had limited testing on his defensive wrestling. So that's a big question mark right there. I would also say Lee's striking has improved more. It's better than it was the first time. Al has improved his striking, absolutely. His volume is good. His combination work is good. But I'd say Lee throws straighter punches, and when you combine that with his reach, it's going to allow him to hit the target first and more often. I would say Al has to win this either over 5 rounds with his striking offense and volume, or with a knockout. He has the power edge as far as the stats are concerned. As far as what I've seen, I give him the power edge. I don't know if he can work the volume game and be successful over 5 rounds. If Lee starts to fade after a couple, that absolutely could happen. I don't know if that was just a freak incident where he faded in that fight, again with the staph infection, all those other issues, or if it's something we've seen in the past start to slow down a little bit, but again, it hasn't been consistent enough to really say, hey, he's got a cardio issue. For Lee, he can win this fight with striking volume. Maybe not the power edge. Doesn't have that power to put him away. But I expect to see Kevin Lee mix in his wrestling. Again, Nurmagomedov took it to Al and put him on the mat consistently in the first 2 rounds and really kept him down. And Lee has showed against Edson Barboza, has showed against other fighters. If he commits to his wrestling, he's very difficult to deal with. And I think with Al having to overcome that 7-inch reach advantage, It's going to force him to come forward. It's going to allow Kevin Lee opportunities to change levels and go for takedowns. I think Lee's going to get Iaquinta on the mat. Maybe he'll work to his back and exploit Al's poor submission defense, which has been an issue in the past. Maybe he gets that TKO, especially if he gets the back mount and starts landing big shots and they're just undefended. Again, I was impressed with Kevin Lee. I had Barboza in that fight. I was very impressed with Kevin Lee. I think Iaquinta is a good fighter. He's just very limited here in what he can do to win this fight. And I'm going to stick with my same prediction from the first time these guys fought. And my prediction is Kevin Lee to defeat Iaquinta by submission. So those are my 4 main card predictions for UFC on Fox 31, the last of the Fox shows. We move into ESPN after that. All of my preliminary predictions, as is always the case, will be available for free at kamikazeoverdrive.net. So please head over there and check them out. The bet packs are just $15, giving you entire breakdowns, parlays, and props, betting scenarios, fantasy picks. Again, I think I posted that I've renamed my 2. Within my bet packs, I post 2 sets of parlays and bets. The first one I call the HBC, or the Hardcore Betting Cluster, and that's for individuals with big bankrolls who want to bet on 1 or 2 individual single fights. And again, I rank them gold, silver, bronze, and wild card. Again, you can focus on the gold and silver. If you want to take a little more risk, you can go down to that bronze and wild card sections. The other betting package I put together, all in the same bet pack. I know the terminology is confusing, that's why I'm getting away from it, is the CBC, or the Casual Betting Cluster. And that's for guys who are like, hey, I got $50, I got $200, I don't care if I see it again, I just want to go out and have a good time, drink some beers, bet on some fights, and I wouldn't mind walking away with $1,000 or $400 at the end of the night, and if I don't, no big deal. So those where I take some more risks. We usually see 3 and sometimes 4-leg parlays, and it's just the way it's going to be. I'm going to throw more out there. I'm going to try and craft a little bit more and get away from focusing too much on the prop bets. Again, sometimes it's just too difficult not to include some of them, but we'll see how that goes. Either way, certainly check it out. Again, melbet.org is a site you can check out as well if you're looking to bet. There's a link in the description below. Follow me on Twitter at KO_predictions, and I guess you won't hear me till after Christmas if I'm looking at my calendar correctly. So Merry Christmas to all of you out there. Just happy holidays to anyone who doesn't celebrate Christmas. Again, I know there's big controversy about that. Again, just enjoy your time with your friends and family. Stay healthy. Enjoy the end of 2018, and I will hopefully talk to you before we get to 2019. Nonetheless, take care, guys. Thank you as always for tuning in. I really appreciate it, and I'll talk to you soon.